The rain fell hard that evening. It splashed against the windows of the small pottery studio, the kind of place that smelled like wet earth and old memories. Inside, a boy sat on a wooden stool, staring blankly at the potter's wheel in front of him. His name was Jacob Hill. He was 17, tall and lean, with sharp blue eyes that always seemed tired lately. The sleeves of his hoodie were stained with dried clay, though his hands were still clean. He hadn't touched the wheel in days. Jacob's grandfather, Mr. George Hill, stood near the back wall, quietly cleaning brushes and jars of glaze. His hands were old and wrinkled, but steady. For nearly 50 years, he had made pots, vases, bowls, and memories in that studio. And for all those years, he believed clay could teach people more about life than books ever could. But lately, the studio had gone quiet ever since Jacob's parents died in a car accident 6 months ago. He had stopped shaping clay. He had stopped shaping anything. "You don't have to talk," Grandpa George said gently, not looking at him. "But the clay is waiting." Jacob didn't answer. He just sat there, his hands in his lap, eyes fixed on the silent wheel. His mind was spinning, but not the kind of spinning that created anything. Just noise, regret, pain, questions. All the things he couldn't say. At school, everyone whispered, "There's the orphan kid. He used to be so talented. I heard he cried during art class. He hated it. Back before the accident, he was the one always smiling, always molding something, dragons, teacups, tiny castles." Everyone knew Jacob had the hands of an artist. But now, he couldn't even roll a ball of clay without breaking down. "Why are you even keeping the studio open?" Jacob asked suddenly, his voice dry. George looked over, surprised by the sound. "Because it's not just a place for pots," the old man said softly. "It's a place for healing." Jacob gave a bitter laugh. "Healing? That's what everyone keeps saying. Like clay can fix dead parents." "No," George said, walking over and sitting beside him. "But it can help fix broken hearts." Jacob looked at his grandfather with a glare. "Then why doesn't it feel any better?" George was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up a lump of clay from the shelf. It was cold, gray, and slightly cracked. "You see this?" he asked, holding it in front of Jacob. Jacob shrugged. "This clay has been sitting too long. It's dry. It doesn't look like much. But if I add a little water, a little pressure, and shape it carefully." George walked to the wheel, added water, and placed the clay down. As the wheel began to spin, his hands moved slow, steady, full of purpose. Within minutes, the clay began to rise. It stretched. It curved. It opened like a flower. Jacob watched silently. "It becomes something new," George said. Jacob turned away. "That's great. But I'm not clay." "No," his grandfather said with a sad smile. "You're stronger." Jacob stood up and grabbed his backpack. "I'll be in my room." George didn't stop him. As Jacob walked out of the studio, he felt the cold air of the hallway hit him. He climbed the stairs to his small room upstairs, the one with the single bed and the boxes of untouched art supplies. On the desk, a photo of his parents sat in a cracked frame. He turned it down. He didn't want to see their smiling faces. Not now. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Rain tapped the roof gently now, a softer rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes. The truth was, Jacob didn't know who he was anymore. Without his mom's encouragement, without his dad's laugh from the kitchen, without the smell of Sunday waffles, he just felt empty. He thought the wheel would help, but it didn't. It scared him. What if he touched the clay and nothing came out? What if he had lost his gift? What if he tried and failed? The next morning, Grandpa George was already in the studio, humming an old folk tune as he painted a wide ceramic bowl with soft blue lines. Jacob stood at the doorway watching. "You're up early," George said. "Couldn't sleep." George nodded. "That's how I started pottery, you know. After I lost your grandmother." Jacob stepped in. "I didn't know that. Everyone thinks art comes from joy," George said. "But the truth is, it often comes from sorrow. And from choosing to do something even when your heart isn't ready." Jacob looked at the shelf. His old dragon sculpture was still there, dusty but whole. Would you teach me again? He asked quietly. George didn't answer with words. He just moved aside and nodded toward the stool in front of the wheel. Jacob sat. The clay was already there, soft and cool to the touch. His hands shook as he reached out. But once they touched the clay, something happened. Not magic, not peace, but something small, like a whisper. The wheel spun. His hands moved slowly, clumsily at first. The clay wobbled. His fingers pressed too hard. Gentle, George said behind him. Let the wheel do its work. Jacob exhaled. He steadied his fingers. Tried again. The clay began to rise. Not much. Just a small shape. Uneven. Ugly, maybe. But it was his. For the first time in months, he made something, and it didn't break. As the wheel turned, so did something inside Jacob, like a door opening, just a crack. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if tomorrow would feel better, but he knew this. He had started. The clay was not perfect, but neither was he, and that was okay.
The studio was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It was peaceful. Jacob sat at the wheel, his jeans speckled with clay dust, his hands caked in dried slip. He stared at the little pot he had shaped the day before. It wasn't perfect, far from it. One side bulged out too much and the base was uneven. But it was something. It existed. He had made it. And he hadn't cried. That felt like a victory. Grandpa George walked in, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. No. Coffee for you, he said with a small smile. You still got a young heart. Jacob chuckled softly and took the mug. Thanks. The warm drink felt good in his hands, even though he was still nervous. He had woken up with a weight in his chest again, that same familiar fear. But he had forced himself downstairs. He had told himself, try again. Just try. You know, George said, as he sat down across from him. That pot's not half bad. Jacob looked at it. It's kind of ugly. It's honest, George replied. That's better than pretty. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their drinks. Outside, birds chirped. The rain was gone, replaced by weak sunlight filtering through the window panes. It cast soft lines of light on the dusty floor. Jacob ran a finger along the rim of his pot. What happens next? Next, George said. We fire it, but first we let it dry. Rushing ruins everything. Clay has to rest before it can face the heat. Jacob nodded slowly. He understood what that meant, even if it wasn't just about pottery. Do you remember the first thing you made? He asked his grandfather. George smiled and leaned back, eyes drifting upward. I do. I was about your age. Made a teacup for my mother. It was lumpy, crooked, and it leaked. Jacob laughed. Did she use it? Every morning. Said it was her favorite, even though it spilled more tea than it held. Why? Because I made it for her. It came from my heart. Jacob fell quiet again. He missed his mother so much it hurt. She would have loved this pot. She would have taken a photo of it and posted it online, calling him my little genius, even if it looked like a squashed mushroom. Do you think people ever stop missing someone? He asked. No, George said. But the missing becomes softer, less sharp. Jacob looked at the pot again. I want to make something better. You will, George said. Not because you want to impress anyone, but because you'll grow. Just like the clay. That afternoon, Jacob started on a new piece. A bowl, this time. Asterisk, his fingers were steadier. His breathing slower. The wheel spun, and his hands followed. Its rhythm. Press, release. Shape, smooth. Over and over. Asterisk, it still wasn't perfect. But it was better. Asterisk, every now and then, George would pass by, give a tip, or just pat Jacob on the back. It wasn't like school, where every mistake felt like a failure. Here, mistakes were part of the journey. Asterisk, don't fight the wobble, George told him once. Learn from it. And Jacob did. By evening, he had 2 new pots sitting beside. The first. His arms ached. His shirt was a mess. But he smiled. I forgot how good this feels, he said. George nodded. It's not just your hands working, you know. It's your soul. Asterisk, that night, Jacob went to bed without turning the photo frame down. Asterisk, he even touched it, his finger resting on his mother's smile. Asterisk, I made something today. Mom, he whispered. I hope you'd proud. Asterisk, the next few days passed with a new rhythm. Asterisk, Jacob woke up earlier, ate breakfast with his grandfather, and headed to the studio. Every day he made something new. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it collapsed. But he didn't quit. Asterisk, one morning he opened an old wooden cabinet in the studio and found boxes of his childhood pottery. Asterisk, tiny cups. A lopsided horse. A turtle with one eye missing. Asterisk, he laughed. Wow, I was weird. Asterisk, you were curious, George corrected. That's the best kind of weird. Asterisk, they cleaned the pieces and placed some on a small shelf. It became Jacob's personal gallery, a quiet reminder of who he was before the world changed. Asterisk, but not everything was peaceful. Asterisk, one afternoon, while working on a wide vase, Jacob pushed too hard. The top wobbled, then folded inward. The whole thing collapsed into a sad clay mess. He cursed under his breath and slammed his hand down. George looked up. What happened? It's ruined, Jacob muttered. It's just clay, George said. We start over. Asterisk, I was doing so well, Jacob snapped. I thought I was getting good again. Asterisk, you are. But progress isn't a straight line. Asterisk, Jacob wiped his hands angrily. Maybe I'll never get back to how I was. Asterisk, George put down his brush. You're not supposed to. Jacob looked at him, confused. You're not supposed to go back, George said. You're supposed to become someone new, someone stronger. Jacob swallowed. That night he couldn't sleep again. Asterisk, he went downstairs quietly and sat in the dark studio. The moonlight shone through the window, silver and soft. The shelves of pottery seemed to glow. He stared at the broken vase he had ruined earlier. It still sat on the wheel, frozen in failure. He reached out and touched it. It was cold now, drying already, useless for shaping. Asterisk, but maybe not useless. Asterisk, he picked up a small carving tool and began scraping gently, carefully. He didn't try to fix it. Instead, he transformed it. Asterisk, by the time morning came, it was no longer a vase. It was something else entirely. A sculpture. Abstract, strange, but full of feeling. Like sorrow turned into shape. Asterisk, George found him there, asleep beside it, clay dust on his cheek. Asterisk, when he woke, his grandfather simply said, Now that is art. Jacob smiled. Maybe he was clay too, still soft, still shaping. Asterisk, and maybe, just maybe, the fire wouldn't break him. Asterisk, it would make him stronger. The kiln stood like a sleeping dragon in the corner of the studio. Asterisk. It was old, brick-built, and stained from years of use. The inside was lined with fire-resistant walls, cracked with time but still strong. Jacob stood in front of it, staring at the metal door like it might bite him. Asterisk. Are you sure? He asked. Asterisk. George nodded. They're dry. It's time. Asterisk. Jacob looked down at the pots and bowls. He had made 6 in total. Each one was different. Each one told a piece of his story. Some still wobbled a little. One had a chip on the rim. But they were his. I'm nervous, he admitted. George smiled. That's a good sign. Means you care. Asterisk. With gentle hands, they loaded the pieces into the kiln. George showed Jacob how to space them apart so they wouldn't touch. The fire changes them, he said. They can't lean on each other. They have to stand alone. Asterisk. Once everything was in place, they shut the door and turned the dial. The sound of the gas starting up was like a low growl. Jacob sat on a stool, watching the temperature gauge slowly rise. How hot does it get? Asterisk. About 2,000 degrees. Fahrenheit, George said. Enough to melt weakness. Strength takes heat. Asterisk. They didn't talk much after that. They just listened. The soft whoosh of the fire. The ticking of the gauge. The occasional crackle from inside. Asterisk. Jacob felt like he was the one in the kiln burning, changing, becoming. Asterisk. He thought of his mom again. And for the first time in weeks he didn't cry. He just remembered. How she used to sing while folding. Laundry. How she always brought him clay after school. How she told him he had the softest hands of any boy she ever met. Asterisk. He missed her like the moon misses the sun. But her memory was warm now. Not sharp. Asterisk. Do you ever think about Grandma? Jacob asked suddenly. Asterisk. George looked at him. Every day. Asterisk. Does it still hurt? Asterisk. Sometimes, George said. But mostly, it helps. Asterisk. Jacob nodded slowly. He understood now. Grief wasn't something you escaped. It was something you carried. That clay taught you how to carry things. They left the kiln to cool overnight. The next morning, Jacob ran down before breakfast. He stood in front of the cooling kiln, nervous again. What if they cracked? What if everything exploded? Asterisk. George joined him with a thermos of cocoa and a knowing look. Ready? Asterisk. Jacob took a deep breath. Yeah. Asterisk. The kiln door creaked open, releasing a wave of warmth and ash-scented air. Asterisk. Inside, the pots were no longer dusty grey. They had turned into deep shades of brown, red, and cream. The fire had kissed each one differently. Jacob picked up the first bowl. It was solid, glossy, strong. He smiled. They survived. Asterisk. They did, George said. So did you. Asterisk. They placed the finished pieces on the front table like a gallery. Jacob stared at them for a long time. He felt proud. Not just because they looked nice, but because he had finished something. Asterisk. Later that afternoon, George handed him a camera. Take pictures, he said. Why? Asterisk. You'll see. Asterisk. Jacob took careful photos of each pot. He wiped the lens, adjusted the light, and made sure the colors showed well. Then he followed George inside to the study. Asterisk. George opened an old laptop and logged onto a website called Craft Roots. Asterisk. It was a pottery community, full of artists who shared their work and stories. I want you to upload these, George said. Jacob hesitated. What if people laugh? Asterisk. They won't, George replied. And even if they do, you made these. That matters. Asterisk. With shaking hands, Jacob created a profile. He titled it, the potter's grandson. Then he uploaded the photos and added short captions. *** bowl 1. The first shape after months of silence. *** vase. Collapsed during shaping. Became something new. *** plate made while thinking of mom. *** he hit post and leaned back in the chair. It felt terrifying and freeing. 2 hours later, someone commented. Beautiful texture. Love how raw this feels. Then another. This tells a story. I can feel the emotion. Jacob's eyes widened. They like it. George clapped his shoulder. Told you. That night, Jacob slept deeply. For the first time in a long time, he didn't dream of funerals or hospital beds. He dreamed of shapes, of hands covered in clay, of fire that didn't burn, only refined. Over the next few weeks, pottery became more than a distraction. It became a purpose. Jacob started spending more time at the wheel than anywhere else. He tried new styles, big bowls, twisted vases, sculpted faces. Some worked, others didn't. But he kept trying. And the followers on his page grew too. 100. Then 300. Then 500. People started messaging him, asking about his process. One girl named Hannah wrote, "Your work makes me feel seen. I lost my dad last year. This helps." Jacob wrote back, "Thank you. I'm sorry for your loss. Pottery helped me too." He never would have said something like that a month ago. He was changing like the clay in the kiln. Then. One evening, George made an announcement. I entered your vase into the Winterville Art Fair. Jacob nearly dropped his mug. You what? I submitted it online. Under your name. They accepted it. But I'm just a kid. I'm not ready for a real show. George looked at him seriously. You were ready the day you didn't quit. Jacob didn't sleep that night. His thoughts raced. What if they hated it? What if nobody looked at it? What if his mother were here? Would she be proud? But he showed up. The Winterville Art Fair was small, held in the local library's basement. But it felt huge to Jacob. He wore a button-up shirt and jeans with only a few clay stains. His vase sat on a white pedestal, a card underneath it. Remade by Jacob Thomas. People walked by. Some stopped. Some nodded. Some smiled. One woman whispered to her husband, "This one looks like grief and healing." Jacob turned away. Quickly, heart pounding. She got it. She really got it. After the fair, Jacob and George walked home in the cold. The stars were out. The sky was quiet. You did good, George said. Jacob looked up. No, he replied. We did. And for the first time, Jacob felt like the cracks inside him didn't mean he was broken. They meant he had been through fire and survived.
The day started to feel full again. Jacob's mornings now began with stretching his fingers, warming up his wrists, and walking out to the studio with sleepy eyes but a focused heart. He didn't drag his feet anymore. He didn't feel lost in the silence of the house. Instead, he filled it with the hum of the wheel, the scrape of the wire cutter, and the soft thump of spinning clay. His hands were no longer afraid. They knew what to do now. One cold morning, as snow began to settle gently outside the windows, Jacob looked at George and said, I want to try something harder. George raised an eyebrow. Harder than what you've already done? Jacob nodded. I want to make a teapot with a lid and a handle. And a spout, George chuckled, sipping his coffee. That's ambitious, I'm ready, then let's do it. They started with drawings. George showed Jacob how to break the design down into parts: the body, the lid, the handle, and the spout. Jacob measured carefully and took his time. The first few attempts fell apart on the wheel. The spout twisted the wrong way. The lid didn't fit. The handle cracked while drawing, but Jacob didn't throw them away. He kept each broken part on a shelf in the corner of the studio and labeled them with sticky notes. Too soft, too thin, too rushed. It was like his failure shelf, and it taught him more than any success could. Finally, after weeks of trying, Jacob made one that worked. The spout poured smoothly. The lid clicked gently into place. The handle was solid. They fired it in the kiln. He waited nervously again, but this time with quiet confidence. When they opened the kiln, the teapot gleamed with a deep forest green glaze. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. George lifted it carefully and handed it to him. You've done it, Jacob smiled. I want to give this one away. To who? I don't know yet, but someone who needs something beautiful. George nodded. That's the heart of a real artist. Later that evening, Jacob wrote a caption online. Teapot took me 3 weeks. I broke it 5 times, but I kept going. Grief is like that. You don't get it right the first time. The comments poured in again. One woman wrote, my sister died this year. I haven't made anything since, but this makes me want to try again. Another said, you're not just shaping clay. You're shaping people. Jacob stared at the screen in awe. His work, his story, his pain, it was helping others. And then came a message that made him pause. It was from a man named Paul. He said, Hi Jacob, I run an art therapy group at a hospice center. Some of our patients have been following your page. Would you ever consider teaching a simple pottery class? Jacob's first instinct was fear. Teach him? He was only 14. What did he know? But then he thought of his mom, of how she taught him things just by being present, of how George didn't just fix his sadness, he handed Jacob the tools to shape it himself. Jacob replied, Yes, I'd love to. They set it up 2 weeks later. The hospice center was quiet and warm. Most of the patients were older, sitting in wheelchairs or reclining in soft chairs. Some had oxygen tanks. Some couldn't speak, but their eyes were alive. Jacob brought a small bag of clay, some tools, and a folding wheel George had kept from his teaching days. He was nervous at first, fumbling over his words. But when he sat down and started showing them how to press, roll, and shape, something clicked. His hands did the talking. He showed an old man how to roll a coil, helped a woman press her thumb into the center of a cup. It doesn't have to be perfect, he said over and over. Just real. After the class, one nurse came up with tears in her eyes. Mr. Harold hasn't spoken in 3 days, she whispered. But today, he said, I used to do this with my wife. Jacob blinked, overwhelmed. It wasn't just clay anymore, it was connection. As they packed up, Paul shook Jacob's hand. You've got a gift, kid. Don't let it go. When Jacob got home, George was waiting on the porch. He smiled before Jacob even said a word. I think I found the person for the teapot, Jacob said, and he wrapped it carefully, writing a note inside the box. For hands that remember how to shape joy, Jacob, he delivered it the next day to Mr. Harold. The old man looked at the teapot with watery eyes and nodded once slowly. Jacob didn't need to say anything. Some things spoke louder in silence. Days rolled into weeks. Snow fell thick on the ground. The studio became Jacob's second skin. He started a small blog, sharing not just photos but feelings, thoughts on grief, healing, creation, and hope. His followers passed 1,000. Then 2,000, a girl from Texas, wrote to say she had started pottery after reading his blog. A teacher from Ohio shared his page with her students, and one morning, George placed a small envelope on Jacob's workbench. What's this? Jacob asked. George shrugged. Just something I've been thinking about. Jacob opened it. Inside was a brochure, the Vermont School of Art Summer Youth Program. There were pictures of teens working in big sunny studios, holding finished pieces, laughing beside their kilns. I can't afford this, Jacob said quickly. George gave him a look. It's a scholarship application. Jacob's heart thudded. You think I could get in? I think they'd be lucky to have you. He stared at the brochure for a long time. Something deep inside him whispered, maybe this is what Mom meant when she said I had magic in my hands. That night, he filled out the application. He included photos of his work. He wrote about losing his mom, about the first cracked bowl, about how the wheel saved him from drowning in grief. He ended his letter with, I learned that clay doesn't fight the hands. It lets you shape it if you're gentle. People are like that too. When he sealed the envelope, his fingers were trembling, not with fear, but with hope. The spring came quietly. The snow melted slowly from the edges of rooftops. Birds returned to the backyard. A few green shoots peeked from the frozen soil behind the pottery studio. Jacob stood by the window every morning now, waiting for the mailman. He didn't say it out loud, but George knew what he was hoping for. That letter, the reply from the art school. I don't want to get too excited, Jacob said one day as they cleaned up the studio. George handed him a damp towel. Why not? Because what if they say no? George smiled. Then we keep making, keep creating. That's what artists do. Jacob nodded, but he still checked the mailbox every afternoon. Then, one sunny Tuesday, it came, a large envelope, cream-colored, with the Vermont School of Art logo stamped in the corner. Jacob stood there holding it like it was a live bird. It's thick, he whispered. George stepped outside. Go on. Jacob tore the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter and a folder with information and a welcome packet. He started reading, and his voice broke. Dear Jacob, we are pleased to offer you admission to the Vermont School of Art Summer Youth Program with a full scholarship. He couldn't finish. Tears blurred the words. George stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. You earned it. Jacob didn't just cry from happiness but from the deep feeling that he had finally honored his mother. He whispered, she'd be proud, right? George nodded, wiping his own eyes. More than proud. The next few months flew by. Jacob prepared for the summer program. He kept posting his pottery online, and more people followed. He started getting requests. Someone wanted a bowl with their dog's name on it. Someone else asked for a custom vase. He didn't even charge much. He just felt lucky that people saw meaning in what he made. George helped him set up a small website. They called it The Potter's Wheel. Made by hands that have felt loss. It wasn't about money. It was about heart. Then summer finally came. Jacob packed his bags, bringing some of his favorite tools, sketchbooks, and a notebook full of ideas. He hugged George for a long time before he got into the car with the program shuttle. You'll be back in 6 weeks, George said. We'll keep your wheel waiting. At the Vermont School of Art, Jacob was surrounded by people his age. Teens from all over the country. Some were painters, some sculptors, some did digital animation. He felt nervous at first, worried he wouldn't be good enough, but something surprising happened. On the second day, during introductions, one girl said, Wait, are you the Jacob who posts the pottery videos on Instagram? The teapot with the forest green glaze. Jacob blinked. Yeah? Another boy added, I follow you. Your stuff is amazing. Soon, he wasn't a quiet outsider. He was someone others looked up to. They wanted to learn from him. They asked him how to make the clay center on the wheel, how he got his glaze so smooth, what inspired him, and Jacob told them. He didn't hide anything. He spoke about grief, about how art helped him survive it, how creating with your hands could speak louder than any words. In their final week, each student had to make a project that reflected their story. Some painted portraits of their families. Some made collages. Jacob made something different. He called it The Hands That Shape. It was a large sculpture made entirely of clay. It showed a pair of hands holding a broken bowl, but instead of trying to throw the bowl away, the hands were filling the cracks with gold. He had learned the idea from a Japanese art called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the floss part of its beauty. When the piece was unveiled at the final show, people gasped. Even some of the instructors had tears in their eyes. One teacher came up and said, "This doesn't just speak, it heals." Jacob just smiled, because that was what he had become, not just a boy who lost his mother, but an artist who found meaning in the broken places. At the end of the program, they gave him a certificate. But what mattered more was the letter the head of the school handed him. It read, "We hope this summer is just the beginning. We'd love to offer you a place in next year's mentorship program and help guide your path to a future in the arts." Jacob looked up in shock. "You mean, like college?" "Yes. You have something special, Jacob. You create from the heart, and we want to help you grow." When he returned home, George met him at the station, smiling wide. "You look taller," George said. "I feel lighter." They drove home quietly, but Jacob's heart was loud with hope. That night, Jacob unpacked everything and went to the studio. He sat down in front of the wheel. It felt familiar again, like an old friend. He pressed his hands into the clay, but this time, he didn't rush. He didn't think of sadness or pain. He just listened to the spin, to the softness, to the stillness. He began to shape something new, not just a bowl or a cup, but a symbol, a new beginning. He smiled as it rose from the wheel, smooth and even. The wheel kept turning, and so did Jacob's life, not back to the way it was, but forward into something new, something shaped by grief, strengthened by love, and spun on the wheel of healing. The end.